That is a very interesting partnership that we have been working on quite some time. For us, we believe that if we talk about volume, there's no way around this multi-purpose co-location type of projects with offshore wind, because the space that is available there is just enormous compared to nearshore. Governments increasingly ask for a more sustainable way of using the space, making sure that you have some other local benefits to the environment, but also to the economy. So it becomes a license to operate. And then all of a sudden, this matches quite well. We need space to grow a lot of seaweed with volume. We have existing structures that we can utilize in the ocean. This is going to be a huge topic to get offshore wind farms approved. And in the end, we strongly believe this is the pathway to get to these 8 million tons that we want.
Hey guys, welcome to the Paxtier Podcast. It's currently 0 degrees in the middle of summer and raining. Enrico and I have a very special episode today with Arctic Seaweed and Matthias. We had a really far-reaching conversation talking about modularity, offshore wind farming, the specifics of how cultivation changes according to the line diameter that you're using, and seeding, mechanization, and we dived quite deep into their partnership with Simply Blue Group, which is an offshore wind farm developer. I think one of my favorite things he said was, he goes, I've always wanted to be a farmer, so putting something in the water, coming back a month later, and suddenly there's something there. Yeah, that's something I really relate to. Yeah. He was a really fun guy, and I would totally recommend following him on all social media channels. It was such a great chat. Without further ado, let's dive straight underwater and get to grips with Arctic seaweed and seaweed cultivation. Matthias, great to have you on. It'll be super to hear a little bit more about your journey into the space, because you've been involved with a variety of different aspects of seaweed. Yeah. Ecosystem services. It'd be really good to hear more about that.
Yeah, my background is not really kind of ocean or seaweed at all. So, I have a typical business background with a master's in strategy and went into consulting like you should after business school, and and did all that grinding work, and kind of was in my last position at Porsche in Germany, and I felt I needed a break after a couple of years in the industries, and so I quit my job and sold everything. And then I found this NGO in the north of Norway called In the Same Boat. And I wrote them, and, they sail along the coastline of Norway and picking plastic from the ocean. And that was just fantastic because I love sailing and I love being on the ocean. And joined them, stayed with them for 8 months. And then I felt like I might want to call this year an ocean sabbatical. And then after working with them, I found Catapult Ocean, the venture capital fund in Oslo. And I joined them as Ross, one of the investment directors, always keeps saying that the most overqualified intern. But I just wanted to learn about the ocean impact and investing and what is out there. And in that job, I first heard from seaweed, because they obviously were screening many, many companies that were in the seaweed space. And I looked at it and I'm like, hell, this is a crazy kind of crop. It kind of checks, this industry kind of checks so many kind of mega trends that we are working with. And, and I thought this is a space that I want to be involved in. So I have 2 friends, one from Germany, one from Norway. And we started talking about seaweed and what we could do. And then we were like, we all have business degrees. We have not really any kind of experience biologically wise to grow seaweed. So we thought about what we could do is kind of this ecosystem approach, right? So the ecosystem service approach, where we built this marketplace where companies like seaweed companies can kind of get a value stamp on the ecosystem services that they produce for the ocean and kind of make this into a sellable product. And then we started doing that. We started doing kind of the first, let's call this MVPs, and, started talking to the seaweed side. They obviously were very, very interested in the ecosystem service part, because all of the seaweed companies have that in their business model. We also started talking to salmon companies because we wanted them on the other side of the platform. But we realized quite early that we were early for the industry, right? The seaweed industry itself is still very young, even though it has been around for a long while, but it's still quite young in the end. But through that time, we met Kim, the CEO of Arctic Seaweed. And he was a fun guy to join. And he said, do you want to go, you guys want to come to a harvest or a seeding? And I love working for free in harsh conditions. So I said, yeah, And then during that time, I joined them for my first harvest in Bergen, went back for the seeding, went back for the harvesting next year. And then Kim and me started talking more about, okay, what Matthias, your background from strategy and management consulting, isn't there something we could use at Arctic Seaweed? And then we started working on Arctic Seaweed's, scale up strategy and, what do we want to be as Arctic Seaweed 1.5 years ago. And that was kind of the start with Arctic Seaweed. So long story short, kind of by accident, but really fell in love with the kind of characteristics of the industry, which fits so many kind of mega trends that we need to work on, and then just stick with it. And then some things just came together, meeting Kim and meeting Arctic Seaweed and making that jump to work for free on a boat.
How far is Arctic Seaweed from you at the moment?
Far in terms of distance?
Distance, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm based in Oslo. Arctic Seaweed is, so the Kim is living in Fleckenfjord, which is in the south, which is around 4 hours drive. But the operation with the farm is in Bergen, which is another 5 hour drive. Yeah. So it is a bit of a stretch, but
It's funny how it works, I guess, because Kim was also one of the first people I ever spoke to in the seaweed space. Because when I started out, I had a company called Blue Tech Base, and that was just
Yeah.
news. And he was one of the first. And we spoke at length about the industry
Yeah.
and what he was targeting. And I guess that leads on to my next question, which is around the focus at Arctic Seaweed now. Obviously, you make mega trends, but in terms of Arctic Seaweed, what are you guys working on and what's next?
that's a very good question. I mean, as I said, Kim and me have been working quite hard for over a year now on kind of positioning the company for what we want to be and who we want to be and how we can contribute to the industry. Because the vision that we have is to enable the industry to be sustainable, and sustainable not only from a natural ecosystem perspective, but also from a financial and, business model perspective. Because I think everybody would agree that the industry still has to show that it is there to stay. Right? It can still all fail and be a big hype for a couple of years. So we want as a vision to enable the industry, and we realized quite early that often only comes through volume, right? So we believe that the volumes are too small to make this into a sophisticated industry where investments come in, where, big food conglomerates come in, where fertilizer companies come in, where feed companies come in. So our mission is to produce volume, because I think that is what the industry needs. We need to have predictable volume in the industry so that, a Nestle, an Orkla, and, a Unilever can expect megatons of seaweed every year. And then we said, okay, if our mission is volume, we want two strategies within Arctic Seaweed. So we realized that we will not be able to produce this all ourselves, but we say, okay, we have our farm technology, which we believe is our core competitive advantage. We come from the tech side. We use that tech on our own farms in around Bergen. But then we realized, okay, we also want to enable the industry by giving access to the tech to other companies, because again, the industry, we will not make the industry survive alone. We need other companies also to bring that volume up and help us also to survive as Arctic Seaweed. So we developed this concept, and I come from the software world. So we called the seaweed as a service and not software as a service, where we give access to our technology, to our know-how, to our experience through this concept where people are, buying some parts of the farm and only leasing some of the other parts of the farm, and also kind of agree on a buyback agreement for volume. And by that, we believe that we ultimately can, grow our own seaweed and be a significant seaweed producer, but also enable other companies that come up everywhere. There are so many seaweed companies coming up every month, even, to enable them to grow seaweed to the same kind of quality with the same kind of know-how that we've built up over the last 6-7 years.
Could you possibly expand more on the tech that makes Arctic Seaweed stand out? What is it about your cultivation system that is so, innovative?
Yeah.
That's the good.
So, I mean, from the beginning, we had some beliefs when it came to scale, right? So when we started, or when Kim started, I came only in 1.5 years ago, but when Kim and the team started, they always had in mind this kind of industrialized scaling of the industry, right? So what they build is right away in a mindset that it has to be automated and mechanized as much as possible. Without that, we will never be able to compete on the labor costs with, low income countries in Asia. So our entire processing line, our harvesting, our seeding is automated and mechanized. We also built this very modular. So a farm structure from Arctic Seaweed looks like a very modular, industrialized kind of compact system, which is good because we obviously want to extend farms where we are, right? So if we have a partner right now in Greenland, if they have these ramp up curves that we give them, they just extend by modules, right? And this is a very good way of scaling up a farm structure if you have these modules that you can just extend and, add to existing modules. We also built the farm so that it is kind of customizable to different kinds of locations. So you can merge the farm to different levels. So for example, if we grow seaweed in Greenland, it might need a different types of depth than in Norway or in Ireland, right? So, and also depending on the species. So the farm structure is made to kind of modular and customized to where you deploy it. You can even put it all the way down to under 50 meters. So if you want in the summer to not let anything grow, you just set it down to 50 meters and leave it there. Nothing will grow under 50 meters. And I think if you look at it from a design perspective, it's also over dimensioned for nearshore operations. We already, the entire system is over dimensioned to kind of function in also more severe conditions. Like for example, now in Greenland, the whole system was frozen over by sea ice. And we were quite afraid, or Kim had quite a lot of sleepless nights, that when, winter breaks and the ice breaks, that the farm is gone. But it was there. It was still there and it was in one piece and it looked very fine. No wear and tear on it. So we kind of got it ice class proofed.
It sounds like a Hollywood movie.
Our partner, promised us that, no, this bay is never going to freeze and grows. And but it's a good test. I mean, this is what the industry needs. We need to test stuff and see if something works or not. But maybe one more thing to add, and I think that's kind of probably the most key to the scale of our farming system, is that we base everything on direct seeding. We strongly believe that the only way to get to the volumes that, we keep repeating 8 million tons in 2030, everybody's quoting that number. If we want to do that, we believe it's only going to go through direct seeding, because the benefits of direct seeding compared to twine seeding, we believe outweigh, the predictability right now. Yes, twine right now is very predictable. It gives you predictable yields. It is very it's a proven methodology, but the input factors, the hatchery size, the water, the electricity, the size of the spools, this is going to be tricky to put in a 6,000 hectare offshore wind farm. So, the direct seeding technology that we've developed, we believe is the one that will enable the scale that we all want and need.
For the average layperson, what does direct seeding look like?
Well, direct seeding means, so you have the two different types of seeding, right? Let's start with twine. With twine, you produce a little plant in the hatchery on land for a couple of weeks, and the plant obviously grows already to a certain size. And then that plant grows on a little line, and that line will then be put on a spool, is that size sometimes. And then you bring that on board of a vessel, and then you put that line with a little plant on a bigger rope. What direct seeding does is we are producing very, very, very tiny plants that are in a solution, and basically millions of spores fit into one bottle of water. And we then directly seed on board of the vessel that we use onto the line, which means that, we can, if we have 6,000 hectare farm in an offshore wind farm in Ireland, that is maybe just a bucket load of seeds that can be installed in an offshore wind vessel. Whereas the twine seeding for 6,000 hectare would be enormous job to logistically, manage and kind of produce. So I'm not sure if that is idiot proof, but
Very cool. It opens up a lot of questions I have when it comes to direct seeding about how do you ensure that they actually attach? Are you maintaining specific temperatures? I know that you have to get the conditions perfect, right, to get a good attachment rate.
Yes, and this is exactly where you currently put the challenges for us, right? So again, twine seeding gives you very predictable yields. It is easier to use, which is good at the moment, because now it's good to show predictable yields. But we are working on that difficult part to figure out, okay, what is the right density to seed with on the line? What is the right line structure? So we have always tests and trials with different kinds of systems, different kinds of densities, different kinds of line space in between, because our aim is to mimic the predictability of twine. And that is that's a challenge. And I'm not a biologist by any means, but we have come now very close to kind of the yield numbers that twine is producing. And I think we talk a lot with our partners or other seaweed companies, and they all agree that, the scale is probably has to come from direct seeding, because the economic factors are just different compared to twine. But, we use a glue, for example, that is based on seaweed that goes onto the line after we seed the line on our machine. So there's different ways to make the stick and the different ways to kind of to deploy it. But again, this is exactly the challenge that we face, to mimic the predictability and the yield of twine combined with the scalability of direct seeding.
We've touched on a lot of different points there, and I think that also lends itself to the next avenue of questions, which is around the algae, the seaweed industry in general. Where do you see the seaweed industry going in the next 5-10 years? And what major roadblocks are we having to overcome on that journey?
That's a very good question. It's probably the most important question for the industry. Like, I think the industry is at this stage now where, I think people would call this the Death Valley part, So we have shown that the industry can create some companies that seem to be solid, but we have also seen that now companies that have no pathway to profitability through scale or etc. I'm not going to make it, right? So they are the first companies that are declaring bankruptcy, and this obviously has an impact on the mood in the industry, because before that it was all shine and gold and whatever. So now the industry is actually in quite dangerous place in the sense that most new industries are in this kind of death valley. So I think what we need to show in the industry in the next 5 years is that, again, we are able to produce predictable volumes, because otherwise the buyer side will not jump on this. If an Orkla, if a Nestle doesn't know that they get predictable megatons of delivery every year, they will not produce anything with seaweed, because it's too risky for them. So that is one of the major challenges, getting predictable volumes up for the industry to get the buyer side in. I think also one of the next 5 years, what we will see is a lot more collaboration in the industry, because I think we already started reaching out to our, other seaweed companies, and, there are a lot out there. And what is now needed, that we might have to do a bit of specialization. So not everybody needs to do everything. So maybe some companies are very good at one thing and the other ones are very good at the other thing. And then some kind of cooperative working models might come up. Yeah. So I think that is kind of the biggest challenges in the next 5 years. And the industry is not out of the woods. It can still go all wrong. But I think we internally in Arctic Seaweed, we call this the perfect storm for seaweed, because the mega trends are all pointing towards it. There's actually no way around, diversifying our food sources. We need to produce something that doesn't require water, fertilizer. It fits so well into this. It is the perfect storm, but we still need to make it work. And that is in the next 5 years, I think.
So I've also heard that finding buyers who confirm their purchases is actually quite difficult. Do you have anything to say about that?
I mean, for us in Arctic Seaweed, we were quite lucky to get Orkla as an investor on board quite early, or not early, but a couple of years back. So we have a very good partner to kind of collaborate with on, we learned so much from them. What do they need to accept seaweed? What kind of processing, what kind of food standards and food grade, etc. do we need to produce? So that was a very good thing for us. And I think the collaboration with Orkla is fantastic. And then they are a front runner in this kind of industry to be maybe that one company that wants megatons. I think it depends a bit in which kind of parts you're looking. I think on the food side, I would probably agree that it is quite difficult to find somebody buying megatons of food grade seaweed right now, if you don't have an investor that is named Orkla. But if that, for example, other companies like in the biorefinery area, we actually see that their they struggle to find seaweed that they can use because of the price, because they started out with a very low price in those, for those applications. And we now see them moving the price up because they're not able to buy anything. So whereas the food grade is so expensive that they want to get it down. So I think what we currently see in the market is this leveling out of prices in between some equilibrium. So that some companies, like in the biorefinery, they need to pay more than 6 NOK per kilogram. So they maybe go up to 20, whereas the food goes down from 30 to 25 to 23. And then all of a sudden you can think about, yeah, is it maybe better to produce for biorefinery instead of food because we can produce more yield? And yeah, so I think the market is balancing it out a bit, but we strongly believe that we think the market is a given over the time. We at Arctic Seaweed think there will be a market. If we make sure that there is predictable yields and predictable volume, we will have a market for it. So I'm not concerned about the buyer side, but we need to fix that volume predictability so that and then maybe like a cooperative might become super interesting. Because just imagine you have a cooperative where all of the volumes from all of Europe come together, and this has happened before in other industries. So yeah.
Tell us more about cooperative model. You mentioned it a few times now. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this and other industries as well that have really benefited from that.
I mean, I had a chat with somebody from the investor side in Trondheim on the Agriculture conference, right? And he actually pointed that out to us. And he was like, you guys you don't need to put companies together and kind of, buy each other up and make a big seaweed company. What you need to do is this, cooperative approach that you've seen in agriculture already, where farmers maybe, build a co-op and put their volumes together to be a better, negotiation partner towards the buyer side. So I think maybe that is exactly what this industry also needs, because if you have diversified your volume production, either by location or by company or by seeding methodology or whatever, that there might be, there is never going to be a failure in all of those. So if our Bergen farm has a problem because the seed stock was not enough, Greenland might still produce a lot of seaweed. And then, you can de-risk the volume throughout Europe. And for that, you don't need to own the farms. For that, you build a co-op with these companies that you are putting all your volumes together and then, go out and sell this.
But there must be challenges to this cooperative model, including, for example, sharing information.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not easy. This requires trust. This requires a lot of kind of coordination. Somebody needs to run that cooperative. Again, the standards are not the same in the industry. We see this all over the place when, people report the numbers that they produce. We, for example, say it's wet weight. Others say it's dry weight. Okay, so then 100 tons all of a sudden becomes 30 tons dry weight, but you look at the other company and they say we produce 100 tons and you're like, oh yeah, but this is not the same, right? So there is a lot of standardization needed to be able to do something like a co-op. The quality has to be the same because again, food producers, they need good quality, predictable quality and to a certain standard. So there is a lot of standardization needed for a step like that. And also maybe one more add. We actually look a lot towards investors driving this because we think that there are some investors out there that have a lot of stake in the industry. And I think they are often the ones that also start kind of building these blocks together, right? Because if an investor is invested in a couple of seaweed companies, they want them to survive. And if they understand what is missing to make them survive, they might kind of buy that and put this together, So it might come from the investor side that this push for collaboration or cooperation or whatever you want to call it is driven by investors invested in the same companies.
With your background with Cooperative and business, but also with Arctic Seaweed, why did these companies fail recently? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
And how can we prevent that?
It's a very good question. I mean, it's a very hard job to run a company and make it survive. So first of all, I think all of these companies did a fantastic job on their part. I've been visiting them and talking to them. It is sad to see companies, not succeeding in that way. But I think it's a bit what I said in the beginning, that if we can't kind of find a way to get to some kind of scale, that the business economics will not work. And the companies are obviously supported by investors that often look at, how can we get profitability and sustainability in a balance, right? And that is still a huge challenge. We can even make seaweeds unsustainable, right? And I mean ecologically unsustainable. So, it's not just the growing seaweed by the million will help us. It can create some bad stuff too. But we need to balance this. We need to also get a way to kind of scale a company to make it sustainable, both financially and from a biological and environment perspective. And I think some of the companies struggle to get on this scaling track. Again, I come from the business side, and I understand economies of scale, and that this is a very important thing. So I think we need to find a balance between that. But again, one other thing is, industries as young as this, there will always be companies that will not make it. Always. It is very natural and normal. And it's also good from a economics perspective that companies don't survive. They are not supposed to survive if they don't have a way to kind of profitability so it's sad for the individuals, but it is a very normal step also.
So what can you tell us about your partnership with Simply Blue?
Yeah.
And the direction that you guys are taking with that?
That is a very interesting partnership that we have been working on quite some time. For us, we believe that if we talk about volume, I mean, the number 8 million always pops up, right? We believe that if we talk about these volumes, there's no way around this kind of multi-purpose, co-location type of projects with offshore wind and other stuff, because the space that is available there is just enormous compared to nearshore, where you have competition with other aquaculture, where you have competition with, shipping lanes, etc. So we thought in the beginning of this project that our system is based on a very industrialized type of platform. And this is what offshore wind companies want, right? Offshore wind companies, technically, they don't want us there. Let's be honest. Because they have no interest in the seaweed or the money that it produces. It's not that they are looking for. They just want to be, undisturbed in operating their wind farm. And, but what they need is governments increasingly ask for kind of a more sustainable way of using the space, making sure that you have some other local benefits to the environment, but also to the economy. So it becomes a license to operate, to have seaweed in there. And then all of a sudden, this matches quite well. We need space to grow a lot of seaweed with volume. We have existing structures that we can utilize in the ocean. We have offshore support vessels that we can, put our direct seeding and harvesting lines on the production lines. But there are obviously huge challenges with it that we need to figure out now. But then Simply Blue Group, they understand this kind of logic that I just described, right? They are not an operator of wind farms. They are a developer company. So they are basically putting these projects together and financing it and finding partners to operate, etc. And they understand that this is going to be a huge topic to kind of get offshore wind farms approved. And so for us, this is kind of the entryway into the offshore wind operator side that helps us a lot to kind of convince, the Ørsteds or Vattenfalls or, Shell or Total, whoever runs these wind farms to think about seaweed. And I think that partnership with Simply Blue Group is perfect for that, because they are very well known in the industry. They have around 60 gigawatts of installations in the pipeline. It also gives us some time to develop more, because yes, this is going to be looking very different in 2030. How do we harvest 6,000 hectares of seaweed offshore? And nobody has an idea. But we have now a couple of years to figure that out. I think this runway that we got with this partnership is excellent for that. And in the end, we strongly believe this is the only pathway to get to these 8 million tons of volume that we want. This is not going to be only nearshore small farms.
For what I've heard, there's definitely limitations when it comes to nutrient supply and stuff like that. But I'd be really excited to see what you guys get up to with Simply Blue. And yeah, it sounds really exciting. Peter, do you want to move on to your favorite part where we get to ask about the journey and
yeah, why not? Why not? Matthias, how you doing? How's the puppy?
She's sleeping. That's good.
Oh, perfect.
Matthias, something I'd love to ask is around failures and mistakes in your journey. So essentially, what have been your three biggest mistakes so far? And what have you learned from these?
Biggest mistakes in my career or just connected to seaweed?
Career and seaweed. You can do a mishmash.
Hey.
But take your time. There's no rush. I'm so aware we've just been grilling you for the last 35 minutes.
No,
Take a breath. Like there's no.
This
No
topic
pressure.
is very close to my heart, so I could talk for hours on that. So the three biggest failures. This is a tricky one. It's almost like an interview now. I need to find failures that can be put into positive terms. No,
You can restructure it as advice because they're often linked, right?
yeah, exactly. So I think, one of the biggest failures was probably that I stayed in jobs that I probably didn't want to stay in too long. And finding something that you're really passionate about is, I think, very, very important. And I think this sounds cheesy, and you hear this in every, second podcast probably, but it is that way, And when I quit my job at a very well-known German car manufacturer company, people thought I would be crazy and, oh my God, this is a dream job and so many people would laugh. That doesn't matter if it's not for you and if you want to do something else. And the advice is to kind of just believe that something will come out. I started picking plastic on a sailboat in Norway, and now I'm in Oslo working with seaweed and some other stuff with other companies. So there will always be something coming out of this, and you never know. And I didn't know that I would be working with seaweed 4 years ago. So that is, I think, advice to just trust the process and do some stuff that you normally haven't done before. I think biggest failures, and failures is a strong word, but like being too early is sometimes also a problem. Like with BlueCs, for example, our ecosystem service from seaweed startup, we were not seeing that we were too early for the industry, right? The underlying industry, the seaweed industry, was not developed yet. So all the investors into BlueCs said, or potential investors said, but your business case just breaks apart if seaweed is not really kicking off. So we didn't have the patience to kind of wait for the industry to pick up and develop itself. So we actually decided to stop the company because it's too early. That could have been done a bit earlier, but sometimes it takes some time to let go from stuff that you're really passionate about. And the third failure, or I think mistake, I probably would have studied something else. Because I think my job today is, I never had a very good job description. It was always some problem solving. It was more methodology than kind of, I'm not a finance guy. I'm not an accountant or a controller, but it's more like I just fix problems or find solutions or make concepts. And that is nothing you can study, right? So I think my biggest failure was probably to study business, because I kind of hate it and love it. But I think you don't study business to do what I do, right? So I would have studied something like history or psychology or biology or, something that you then can apply and then go into the business world, So I think it's not a failure, but it's a kind of a pathway mistake I did in the beginning. But then again, it was all good for something. And, it's still good that I have that knowledge, but I don't think I would have done this again.
Just to add on to that, can you expand on just taking the jump, saying, right, I've had enough of working at Porsche, and just going, right, it's time to go, let's go and be a plastic pirate. Yeah. How do you build up the courage, and how do you just go, right, it's time to move on?
Or just breaking point?
Yeah.
Well, there's definitely some help in there. So I think your body will tell you if it's time to move on. Can't ignore that for a while, and I've been always working a lot, as a consultant, and I was always very driven to work. But if you work for something that you're not passionate about too much, then it will be hitting your your health. Whereas now for seaweed, when I work with Kim, I work on the weekends with Kim. I go to Fleckenfjord on the weekends. I took my vacation with my other job and went to work with Kim, and it doesn't feel like a job, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is when you realize I always had the struggle to accept that a job is just a job. I can't accept that. From my perspective, I spent so much time on something. It can't be just a job. I never had this idea of, oh yeah, I do my 9 to 5 and then I go home and then I have my happy life at home. For me, work is so important that it has to fit with what I want to work with the people and etc. So, and I think if you don't have that, you will realize that quite soon on your psyche and mental and yeah. And when I then was on the boat picking plastic on the sailboat for the first time, it was just obviously a very different type of life, right? I sold everything. I had nothing left. The only thing I had was a piano that was with a friend. But apart from that, I sold everything. So I think your body will tell you.
Yeah. There's a great quote about this. I forget who says it, but it says something along the lines of most people have jobs, right? Some people have careers if they're lucky, and then the luckiest of all have callings. So you have to pursue that thing at all costs, that North Star. And we see that a lot in this space, oceans and climate and seaweed.
And maybe it is seaweed,
Yeah.
I've always wanted to be a farmer. So I had that dream for a long while, and I've always been sailing. So I think it's not by accident that it is something that is farming ocean. So there is something there. It was not just like, oh yeah, seaweed,
Yeah.
And I also wanted to always live in Norway. And I always wanted to live by the ocean. And sometimes now I need to kind of pinch myself that I'm now living here 5 minutes away from the ocean. Because for me, ocean was always vacation. As a child, we always went to the North Sea for vacation, like for 18 years, every summer. So for me, seeing the ocean is vacation. So when I now go to the seaweed farm and I look here on my other screen on a picture of our seaweed from a drone picture, and it almost looks like vacation pictures, but it's a seaweed farm. So I think that is a bit what the body is connecting to it. So yeah, again, it's not an accident that something with the ocean and farming and nature and a physical product. I think that is something very important. I've always done PowerPoints and Excels and whatever. I love it, but I also hate it at the same time. But producing something where you actually produce something and you put it in your hand and you're like, God damn it, I threw this into the ocean. This is what happened. And now I start growing my own chilies here and then cucumbers. So I think there was something inside that was always there, but it had to be triggered.
Yeah.
This was the moment when the pain was so high that you then just say, oh, come on, fuck it.
Completely relate to that. Talking of which, you mentioned your current work. I think that's with Konsberg Digital, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of efforts there with securing data from vessels on efficiencies. And I'm wondering, considering the application of that for seaweed, in particular seaweed cultivation, the data side of it, have there been any movements on that front from your perspective?
I mean, I can tell you, I have been constantly in the ears of my boss at Konsberg Digital, telling them like, oh, we need to go out and see, we need to do something. They need everything. We need offshore vessels. We need special vessels for harvesting. Like, we need the automation systems for big farms. Just imagine 6,000 hectare farm. It has to be managed. And now I actually, Kongsberg is a place that is looking into stuff like that. Obviously, because it's an ocean industry, it fits, they do automation. And, also at Arctic Seaweed, we say that data is one of the scale drivers at some point. Not yet. I think it's a bit too early. We have other stuff that is more important, but it will be the what do we say in Germany? It's the cherry on top of the cake.
Yeah.
It will be the last kind of efficiency gains, like in every industry, right? You normally do the other stuff first, and then data is kind of unlocking more stuff along the way. And if we talk about direct seeding, and Eriko, you mentioned it already, that, it's quite complex. So, and it's a lot of data that we have been gathering since the beginning of our company on the right density, what kind of, structure we use. So predicting when the best time to harvest it, predicting when the best time to deploy is, based on algorithms, etc. I mean, that's going to be fantastic, but that is very expensive. That is very hard to do. And it's, we need to fix some other stuff first. But I strongly believe that data will play a crucial role at some point in this industry. I keep telling Kim that I'm dreaming of this farm that is, moving up and down automatically based on a sensor tracking nutrients. And, and you have an app maybe to see, oh, my farm in Bergen is currently at 5 meters, or I can push a button, I don't know. But I think there will be at some point a push from these industries also into seaweed. And we saw this already. Another company you might be familiar with, they are also bankrupt. Or I'm not sure if they're bankrupt, but they are not around anymore. But they were maybe a bit too early on that sensor data part of the seaweed industry. But I think there definitely is a place for this. But digitalization normally comes one step after the core feature of the industry have been in place.
So looking at teams, I mean, we're talking about guys outside your work, basically, but some of these other data platforms that have been built to support farmers with site selection, for example. You're thinking this is something great to build the infrastructure, but still a bit too early.
No, I don't think it's too early. The only problem is that they will face is exactly the same problem that we had at BlueCs, right? It's a very tricky timing problem. You can't be too late, but you also can't be too early. So I think it's important to work on this stuff, and we can't do it, so somebody else has to do it. But it will require that the industry is, again, an industry that is there to stay. So if you build your entire business case on the seaweed industry, investors might be reluctant to invest into you because they will say, I don't know, if the seaweed industry doesn't survive, you don't have a business case. So I think we will have to do something there, but it's very tricky to bridge that this period where your underlying industry is not there yet, right? Because again, we will not invest as Arctic Seaweed in very fancy sensor buoys that are costing millions of NOK, because we can't. We have to focus on some other stuff right now.
So with BlueCs, you were providing some sort of accreditations for ecosystem services, right? That was one of the routes.
Yeah. So what we tried to do is we said, okay, we believe that ecosystem services from seaweed is a payable service to somebody. So what we did is we quantified the ecosystem service on the seaweed farm, for example, for nitrogen and phosphate. We made that into a sellable product where we designed and said, okay, the closer your farm, for example, is to a polluter, the more effective the uptake will become, etc. So there was this kind of calculation happening in the background. And then we tried to find buyers on the B2C side and the B2B side. So for example, a salmon farm could say, okay, we put nitrogen and phosphate into the ocean. We pay a certain amount of money to a seaweed farm in the local vicinity of my salmon farm to cycle or recycle that kind of pollution for me. So I support a seaweed company industry and also can show that we've kind of made sure that the nitrogen and phosphate that we put into the ocean by excess feeding our fish is taken out again. And we could also do the same with B2C. We thought about, okay, if you have a salmon consumption of, 5 kilograms a year of salmon, that is so much nitrogen and phosphate being emitted into the ocean through the process of, making that salmon. So you give X amount of money to a seaweed company where you are kind of located, for example. And this is kind of a very typical marketplace logic between, two players. But it was too early.
Too early with enough farmers, but also with data, I guess, is a big question.
No, data is actually quite easy because seaweed companies have to check their plants on nitrogen content and phosphate content. So it is quite easy to calculate how much nitrogen and phosphate you take up. We had more struggles on for example, salmon side. They for example said that, but why would we now put nitrogen and phosphate on the problem table? Because they were only focusing on CO2, right? And we wanted to stay clear from CO2 because seaweed and CO2 is not clear yet. We don't really have a very clear picture of, is it sequestering? How much is it sequestering, etc. So we didn't want to go that path.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised because nitrogen and phosphates is seemingly a massive problem for a lot of.
Yeah, but it's not in the
Okay.
public. It's not in the public eye. Not like CO2, right? Everybody's talking about CO2. So the salmon farms we talked to, and there were some major companies in there, they all said, as long as nobody forces us, either by public opinion or by governments, it's tricky.
So there was no major pain point with overpolluting local sources of water.
Okay. No, they argued that, but we are it's in the Atlantic and there's a lot of washing through and, mixing.
Yeah.
No problem with this. So on the seaweed side, we had lots of partners already. They were all happy because obviously for them, it is an existing business. It's an additional revenue stream on an existing product.
Yeah.
But it was too early.
That is true. It's timing with some of these nutrient markets. Feels like it's going our way. It might be 5, might be 10 years. Yeah. Rico, it looks like you're eager to say
nothing. I just couldn't. Really, I just couldn't believe that they dug in their heels so much. You would have thought that you come to some kind of agreement where you both benefit from the seaweed that's growing. Like, I know, like, there's pretty clear evidence that your seaweed grows when you get runoff from salmon farms and stuff like that. So you would have thought something could be worked out, but too early, I guess.
Some salmon companies, I mean, like Lerøy, they have their own seaweed company, Ocean Forest. So they see this as a benefit. But I think companies are very worried that they kind of, point or put up a problem that doesn't exist right now, and these not in the public sphere. Where we had some traction was more on the importer side and processing side. So we had some interesting talks with a company in Germany that is buying salmon and makes that into some product, and they wanted to push this kind of logic onto the salmon producer and say, okay, I want you to do this so that we can put on our packaging, for example, that this is a nitrogen phosphate neutral salmon, right? So, but then it was not the salmon company pushing for it. It was the distributor. Yeah.
What about literature and books? Anything that you recommend reading? It could be a magazine. It could be a fiction book. It could be a non-fiction book that sort of shaped your thinking in the last few years and that you would give to your younger self.
I think it would be Utopia for Realists. Bretman. I'm not sure if you know him or the book.
Yeah, I know the book. Yeah.
It is a bit utopian, but like the title says, but it really opened my eyes a bit on the trends that we are running into, and what kind of major shift we will see and need in the way we think about work, and maybe around universal basic income. And then, I know that this might sound a bit philosophical, but in the end, it's always. I read this article today about sabbaticals, right? And then because I did also sabbatical, and then I was like, would I need a sabbatical if I worked for my passion, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the Utopia for Realists is a bit like this because people say like, I need to love your job, but there are so many jobs out there that you will never love, no matter what. Right. And then it is something there is not about, I want to work more. It's more about how can we reduce time spent in stupid jobs that we don't want to do anymore, automate, et cetera, use AI to, but, and Bretman, he describes it very well that, the benefit of a universal basic income is that, it frees up time to do something where you're really passionate about, and the benefits are bigger than the negatives. Of course, there are a lot of controversial studies also on the other side. I mean, this has to be studied more, but it really opened my mind a bit more that how work is supposed to be and what it is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And again, maybe more people would choose a step like we discussed, going out of a job that you don't like, if you are having the safety net of universal basic income. And I think we need to think about that. We're not supposed to work more. We are supposed to work less. And with work, I mean, the work that is the work that you don't do if you would freely choose, right? Like Arctic Seaweed, I would not call work, right? But these jobs that, I don't want to name jobs now, but you probably know what I mean. And he really points that out, that is a good, and we have this chance with artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and AI to, if we use this correctly, to free up resources to, if spent right, we might get a universal basic income at some point. Yeah.
And on a silly side note, I know that I was going to mention that if I was in power, let's say, I know that in medieval times in the UK, they used to give peasants about 150 holidays a year just to maintain their motivation, because otherwise they just refuse to work. So maybe that's another thing we need.
They gave people massive holidays.
No, because the only way they could persuade peasants to keep toiling in the fields and like supplying food to the knights and the castles and stuff like that was by just giving them loads of holidays.
And I mean, are we not going? We have stuff that happens right now that we would never have expected, like home office. 10 years ago, companies would have said, "No, are you insane? Maybe you can just sit at home." So I think we are on that track a bit. We're not talking about 150 days of vacation, but we are, I think, getting to a point where we can do stuff like this more.
Enrico's had a lovely time on holiday the last few weeks, so he's all in favor of
never going back to work again,
thinking and time off.
Yeah, but the point is not never work again, but it is never work in these shitty jobs that nobody wants to do. But if you start doing what you love and you're passionate about, then it's not work.
Yeah.
And then it also doesn't mean that you need to work less. I'm not a big fan of laziness and lying around and doing nothing. I'm very bad with that. But I think we can reduce a lot of these jobs that we don't want. And that's work. And we need to work less on that. But that's enough for now.
Thank you so much for all this, Matthias. It's such a pleasure to actually finally catch up with you. Where can people find you? Where's the best place to find you and Arctic Seaweed?
I'm a very social media shy person. I have no social media except LinkedIn. It's the last frontier. So I think the best way to contact me is on LinkedIn. And also Arctic Seaweed, we're not very vocal, doing a lot of marketing. We started a bit now with MOU with Simply Blue, but we're not very, very present for a reason. We have to focus on something else first. Mm-hmm. But we have a website, aseaweed.com, not aseweed.com. where you can find an email address and, but again, I think the easiest way is Kim on LinkedIn, Matthias on LinkedIn. We can also share my telephone number or whatever. I'm very approachable.
We'll hold off there. We don't want to give people too much to get in touch with you.
I'm pretty sure there will not be millions of people reaching. I'm in Oslo, so if somebody is in Oslo, I'm always happy to have a chat on a coffee or something. So, but LinkedIn is probably the best.
Amazing. And is there anything else you wanted to plug in here before we zoom out?
No, I think but it's a Google Meet, it's not Zoom. A German joke at the end.
Great.
It was fantastic to talk to you guys. I think we need to have a lot more of talking in the industry, even though we are quite good at talking, but talking about all the things we are working on is quite important. So really appreciate your work of connecting people and ideas and interests, etc.
Thank you. We will keep plugging away at this until everyone knows everything about seaweed.